Welcome back to another episode of Spilling the Tea with Dr. T and Lava Lee. And your host, Gabriel.
I think that the name is starting to warm on me a little bit. The T, I mean, it could mean a lot of things. Could mean the truth. Dr. T, I go by Dr. Tyler. Testosterone. So I think it's good. I'm not sure if it's spilling the tea or what's the tea or the tea or LMNOP, QRST.
The truth will set you free.
But the truth will set you free. So here we are, back for another episode. And today we're going to be talking about another uncommonly discussed topic.
But very important topic.
Definitely about the butt.
But
it's definitely important. Something that patients have asked me about. Something that I certainly was not trained about in residency or medical school or sex ed or health class. And there's a lot of different information on the internet, pros, cons, how to do it, how not to do it. And I thought this would be a great place to just give out all the questions that we hear and see what comes about.
Yeah.
And then hear from you as well. You know, if you have questions about the topic after our discussion, please leave them in the comments so we can address those and go from there.
Yeah, I'm excited for all the knowledge that you want to share with us tonight.
Yeah, and a lot of the education that I'm going to provide here was really prompted by patients, people who came to me asking questions. Then I did my own research, tried to find as much clinical evidence-based information that I could find. Also read blogs, read from other people who have tried to educate on this topic and tried to compile all that helpful information to make it a one-stop shop. So what is our topic today?
Today, we're talking about douching.
Douching 101, or how to douche, or how do you do? How do you douche?
How do you do?
How do you do?
How do you do?
This is another topic that is probably going to make me blush a few times. That's good. That means that it's a place where people should come and not feel judged, you know, to just go through some of these questions and find out some healthy, helpful info.
Every time that I think of this topic, and every time I hear this topic in a conversation, it's always a taboo. It's always something that people don't discuss. It's always something that people don't talk about it. Obviously, in the gay community, people talk more often about it, but the average person doesn't talk about douching, obviously.
Yeah, and even if you have a group of friends that are queer, maybe they don't talk about it with you or you don't feel comfortable to approach them about it. I certainly have never gone up to a friend and said, how do you do that? Or, you know, what do you do to keep yourself clean? Or how do you prepare for sex? That's not something that I would feel comfortable saying to my friends, but maybe there are people out there that do, and that's great. That is hopefully a community that they're able to have and hold on to with their friends. But for those of us out there who don't have that, there's a lot of questions around the topic. Is it good for you? Is it bad for you? We're going to dive into that, how to do it. But yeah, definitely a taboo topic. Anal sex in general is super taboo. Sex in general is taboo. So you go through these layers of the severity of taboo, and you know, douching for anal sex is certainly one on the top of that list. So
yeah, like the episode before, we talk about the stigma around anal sex.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about another stigma in our society. So we're trying to break some
the
stigmas and taboos.
That's our theme so far.
Breaking dishes, breaking taboos.
Breaking dishes and taboos. Absolutely.
So what is the importance of douching in anal sex?
Yeah, so for some people out there, they want to be as prepared as possible before going into intercourse, which is certainly recommended, especially anal intercourse. This is not something you want to just jump into for many reasons, and we discussed that on a previous episode. But you want to feel as confident and comfortable as possible going in with your partner. Of course, you've communicated beforehand, and being able to say, yes, I'm ready to go is certainly going to reduce some stress and reduce the risk of surprises along the way. So how do you prepare and clean yourself or be as hygienic as possible is going to be a common question people have. And douching is an option. It's not the only option, but it certainly is an effective way to prepare and be hygienic ahead of your sexual escapade.
That's a good word for that. What is actually the definition of anal intercourse?
Yeah, so anal intercourse is going to be just like it sounds. So the receptive and penetrative sexual intercourse between two consenting individuals that involves the penetration of the anal area, the anus, the rectum, however you want to describe it, backside, booty, any of those options is a pretty good definition of anal intercourse.
So let's understand a little bit of hygiene. What is exactly anal hygiene?
Yeah, so this area is certainly known for not being the cleanest part of our body. Certainly, it's where bowel movements are passed through. The skin is not always super clean anywhere on our body. So, how do you keep that area clean? What do people need to know? And what is considered the normal or typical anal hygiene practices? So, this varies for everybody. Some people prefer to be more extensive than others, but in general, it's about keeping the anal opening clean as well as the skin around it, the perineum clean, and then deeper areas as well. And there's varying degrees of how aggressive you want to be. Certainly, showering is one of the most effective ways to clean the skin and to be gentle in the area. And then using things like a douche can help to clean beyond the anal opening into the anal canal, anal cavity, as well as the rectum. Using fiber supplementation or making sure your diet is consistent with a healthy colon is also going to reduce the risk for any surprises or anything that occurs during anal intercourse, and just promote overall anal health in general, rectal health. But yeah, so really just the whole sort of anatomy of that area, anal hygiene really is from top to bottom kind of what it explains. And how aggressive you want to be depends on what your comfort level is, but certainly the goal is to reduce the risk of infection, reduce any concerns that would arise throughout sex, and promote a confident and sort of stress-free experience.
So explain to us students if there's any anatomy terms that we must know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you don't need to necessarily know the specific terms, but having an idea of anatomically what's going on in that area is going to be helpful. So, the anatomical terms that are important to describe the backside, of course, you're going to have the anus, or the opening of the anal cavity, and that is going to be where bowel movements are passed as well as penetration is started. This area is very sensitive as it's lined by something called the mucosal membrane, which is a very thin layer of tissue that is highly susceptible to friction, which can result in injury to the tissue. So that's why lubrication is always very important, whether you're penetrating or using a douche. The next anatomical layer is going to be that anal canal, which kind of will take you from the exterior internally towards the rectum, which is going to be kind of like the largest space that is going to be available for penetration as well as holding bowel movements. Is about 7 to 9 inches long. That area is typically where penetration kind of ends. And it's going to be important because that's the area you want to keep clean. And it's going to be the area that we are mostly focused on when douching, to remove any debris, as well as using fiber supplements to healthily create bowel movements that get away all the debris that could be remaining. Other areas of importance is going to be between the rectum and the anus is going to be the muscular layer. So the sphincters, there's going to be an external sphincter, which is controlled voluntarily. So your brain basically tells it when to open and close. And then the internal sphincter, which is not voluntary, meaning that you have to relax physically, mentally to get it to relax and allow for penetration. This is kind of that area that if you have an emergency and your bowel movement is coming, it's because your brain is not responding to keeping that area closed. It's not voluntary. So if it's ready to be relaxed and things are moving out, you got to get to the bathroom quickly. And that's why people can have emergencies occasionally. But that external sphincter is the one we can voluntarily close to make sure things don't come unexpected.
So there's two. There's the voluntary, there's the involuntary.
Exactly, right. And then you're going to have other pieces of the puzzle. Anatomically, the prostate is going to be a few inches internally, which is going to be a sensory powerhouse for men. Whenever you're having anal intercourse, there's a lot of innervated areas there that feel a lot of pleasure, which is why men can have sometimes even more pleasure being a receptive person in anal intercourse rather than the dominant or penetrative partner. And then the outermost part of the body, as we talked about, near the rectum and the anus, is going to be the perineum, which is that outer skin layer, which is very innervated, a lot of sensory tissue there, which is why rubbing that area can also be arousing in intercourse.
Where are the nerve endings?
Yeah, so the nerve endings are the nervous system tissue that comes literally all the way from our brain, all the way down to our genitalia, and is receptive to touch, vibration, sensation. So anytime you are caressing the area or rubbing the area, those pleasuring signals are going to come from the nerve fibers, go all the way up to your brain and say, "You're doing a good job. Keep it going."
Good feedback.
Good feedback. It can also have some bad feedback, but we're going to focus on the good feedback for now.
For now, I want to talk about the positive.
Let's keep it positive.
Do we have in our body any self-cleaning mechanism around the area?
Yeah, so the body has multiple self-cleaning mechanisms in regards to keeping the rectum, the anal cavity, and the anus clean. And so this is very helpful to reduce the need for douching, especially if you have a healthy diet. Douching may not be necessary whatsoever. So some of the self-cleaning mechanisms, number one is going to be mucus secretion. So while there is no excess lubricant produced in the anus or the rectum like there would be in the vagina, there are mucus secretions that help to move along debris out of the rectum and out of the anal cavity. This is going to be helpful when you pass a bowel movement to remove any debris that's left over. Another mechanism is going to be the muscular contractions that occur when you pass a bowel movement, just like in our colon, as the muscles around the colon will spasm to move bowel movements forward. The rectum has something similar, as well as those external sphincters, internal sphincters of the anal cavity. So those muscles are going to propel any debris or any bowel movements out of the anus to keep it clean. So that's considered another mechanism as well. We also have a lot of healthy bacteria that live in our colon, in our rectum, and they actually will digest some of the debris that's left over. In the meantime, they're also producing important vitamins and nutrients. And so we have this sort of great relationship with some of this good bacteria. And that's a concern we have when we douche. We don't want to use it too much because you can ruin that balance of healthy bacteria that's actually already keeping the colon and the rectum clean. So something to consider there. That bacteria is one of those mechanisms.
So good. The body's trying to help us.
It's trying. Another mechanism that happens more outward near the anus is going to be skin shedding. So all that mucosal membrane, as well as the thin layer of skin around the anus, is constantly shedding, just like all the skin in our body. That helps to remove any damaged tissue or debris that's left on tissue, allowing for new, healthy tissue to grow in its place and keeping the area clean. And then finally, our immune system. So one of the major hubs for our immune system happens to be along our GI tract. So all along our colon and into our rectum, there's a ton of immune cells that are basically hanging out, waiting to clean up any remaining debris and keep ourselves healthy. It's also a great place for our immune system to ensure anything that's foreign that invades us is easily identified and immune responses are ready to go. So it's a really tight relationship between our immune system there and our colon health.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Medicine is fascinating.
But it's funny because the body is trying to clean that area as much as it can.
Yeah, in general, your body wants to keep itself as clean as possible, especially in areas where there's going to be a high level of threat. And so that's going to be mostly dominant in our mouth and in our rectum, right? The two open
Uh,
areas where foreign invaders can come in. And so that's why we have a immune hub basically in our mouth and an immune hub basically in our rectum. Very similarly, we have a ton of bacteria that live in our mouth and are constantly keeping the bad bacteria away and the fungi and parasites out. Very similarly to our rectum, in our colon, we have tons of bacteria that are fighting for us every day. So we have to keep all those things in balance to ensure it stays healthy. And believe it or not, some bacteria are good for us.
so we've been talking about anal intercourse and self-cleaning mechanisms of our body, but let's talk about douching in particular. What is exactly douching and how is used for cleanliness?
So, douching happens to be the use of a device, typically either purchased for that intention, or sometimes people will use an enema and remove the solution inside, some sort of bulb, syringe, to use water and jet propel the fluid inward into the rectum to clean it out in preparation for anal intercourse or for many other reasons. Most commonly, what we're discussing today is the preparation for anal intercourse. And so, really, it's any sort of jet propulsion of water inside to remove any remaining debris that could be present that would cause surprise or concern or mess during anal intercourse.
Is a bidet a douche?
So, in regards to a bidet, that's more of just to clean the external area of the anus. Usually, you would need to insert something to get the water to go
Right,
inside. So,
right.
technically, it could be a form of douching if you want to say that it is just wiping away the debris on the external, which some people is all they want to do in regards to prepping for anal sex, which is completely fine. If you have a good diet and you take fiber or you have consistent bowel movements, you don't need to douche. It's not for everybody. Certainly, using a bidet can be sufficient and maybe your form of douching, but really, douching would be the use of something that penetrates inside the anal cavity and would then allow the water to coat the rectum and remove that debris. So technically, bidet is only the external side.
Well, in Japan, I've heard they have this sort of bidet that has a jet. Someone told me.
Well, that being said, if the bidet jet is strong enough to go internally, which it can be, if you're sitting in a position where the thing can go inside, that's a douche.
As long as they have enough pressure, I guess, to clean the
Yeah, when you're
inside,
relaxed enough to move the water inside.
it could be technical douche.
Yeah.
So
So technically, the douching occurs when water is entering the rectum. So if water goes from the bidet into the rectum, bada bing, bada boom.
whatever works for you. You can use a ball of water if you want.
Well, yeah, well, yes, but we're gonna get to that because
Fine.
it's not the most optimal solution, and we're gonna explain why.
So we have to watch until the end of this video, please.
Yeah.
Are there any potential benefits of douching before anal intercourse?
Right. So there are certainly benefits in regards to ensuring that you have a clean and hygienic environment to start anal intercourse. It's going to reduce the risk of any debris being remaining. There is some clinical data to say it can also reduce the risk of infection because, of course, there's less debris left over, and reducing any risk for stool to be involved is going to reduce the risk of infection, of course. That being said, it needs to be done properly. As we just mentioned, water bottle is certainly used for some people, but you want to make sure that you use something that's not going to cause any irritation to the lining of your anal cavity as well as the rectum. You want to make sure you don't use too much water. Of course, a water bottle can be quite large. Putting too much water in can actually make the system worse and make it drag out for a long period of time and make douching very inconvenient. Also, it can again be harmful if that opening, like a water bottle's opening, can be very irritating if it's not lubricated. And so, again, a lot of those steps that we'll get into.
We should learn those things at school.
Honestly, if we can just get our reading levels higher, I would be happy to be,
I know, but those lessons are valuable.
They're very valuable. I think
You know.
sexual health and education would reduce the pregnancy rate, especially the unwanted pregnancy rate, and reduce the risk of STDs and
Yeah.
STIs, educate and empower people to be more knowledgeable about their own sexual well-being. All those things would be great if we could just
In an
come to a
ideal world.
consensus. Well, yeah, sex is so taboo in a religious culture that it makes it nearly impossible to break through. So maybe one day people will look back on these YouTube videos in 2,000 years and say, look at these relics where they used to have to teach how to douche on YouTube.
Dr. T for President 2064.
Absolutely not.
It's good that you mentioned the fact that you could do douching in excess, and that can make it worse. But is there any risks involved with douching other than the excess of water?
Yeah, so even beyond just the risks of using too much water when you are douching in that particular episode, you can overdo it. So you don't want to douche too consistently. Things you would be concerned about is that it can affect the natural good bacteria in our colon. We want to keep that as healthy as possible. It helps us to digest food and with our immune system and all other sorts of positive things. And then we want to ensure that we don't overdouche because clinical evidence has shown us that if you put too much water on a consistent basis, propelling it upward into your colon, it can cause anatomical changes. Now, we don't really exactly know what the result of that would be, but it could cause harm to the colon, making it more difficult to pass bowel movements regularly. So again, you do want to douche in moderation. There's not a specific amount of time that I can recommend. I do typically say over a couple times a week would be in excess. So
Wow.
there are other healthy ways, though, to keep your colon healthy, keep your colon clean without having to use a douche so regular. So things like increasing fiber intake, watching your diet, and adding a fiber supplement if that's something that you feel like you're not getting enough in your diet already.
Is it okay to use something more than water when you douche?
Good question. So a lot of people will use a disposable enema to douche with because they're readily available. You can buy one at a drugstore, which is totally fine, but they come with solutions, right? They come with a saline solution or they come with some sort of soap solution. You do not want to use either or any type of solution or detergent or soap when douching. The reason is the colon, the rectum, is extremely sensitive to anything beyond lukewarm water. So if you use like an enema, that solution is intended to irritate your colon so that you pass a bowel movement. So if you use something that has soap in it, detergent, some sort of solution, it's going to irritate the lining of your colon and likely cause you to have aggressive bowel
Oh,
movements, which is in turn not what you're looking for.
so why are they selling that?
For an enema, right? So an enema is used if you can't pass a bowel movement,
Oh my
right? Which
God.
is a great question. If you're purchasing one of those, the main goal and intention is not to clean the rectum.
Right.
It's really to help you pass bowel movements that have been clogged there for days. And so, but the queer community, we learn about a fleet enema relatively quickly. We don't know why. But they're mentioned in songs, in TV shows,
Yeah.
movies. But you need to remove that solution because it's going to irritate the lining of your colon. Just use lukewarm tap water. And you don't want to even use too much of it. If a fleet enema is quite a large bulb, you typically only need to use half of that amount of volume of
Wow.
water at a time. If you use too much water, you could potentially move the water beyond the rectum and into the sigmoid colon, which is the next part of the anatomy, moving upward. And if you get the water too far, of course, it's going to get to unprocessed stool that's not ready to reach your rectum, and you're going to end up cleaning beyond what's necessary, which could take hours to clean the inside of your sigmoid colon, right? It's not ready to move into the rectum. All you need to focus on is cleaning the inside of the rectum, which means you don't need that much water, and you certainly don't need a large douche to move that water farther than the rectum. Again, it's only 7 to 9 inches deep.
Things we learn. Oh my
See?
God.
Things you learn.
Don't buy the enema at CVS
I
next
mean,
time, okay?
you can just use some proper tips. An example, if you're going to buy a fleet enema at CVS, I say try to
Do they sell
limit.
it water, like water only enemas?
Even then, I would dump it out, clean it out,
Just use
and
as a douche.
use the device. I wouldn't use the solution.
Copy
Even
that.
if it says lukewarm water ready to go, I would dump it out and use my own because you want to be sure that there's going to be nothing in there that can irritate the lining of your colon. Otherwise, you will not be having intercourse anytime soon.
And just a fraction of it, not the whole bulb.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that there's a lot of air that's going to then be trapped in the bulb, so you have to make sure you get a limited amount of air, or
Right.
fill it all the way up with water and just use
Yeah.
like a small amount of the water. Don't use the whole thing. So yeah, so if my advice would be, if you're going to use a fleet enema, empty it out. The good thing about them is they come pre-lubricated, which is great because you need the insertable portion to be lubricated so it doesn't irritate the lining of your anal cavity and your anus. Fill it up all the way with lukewarm water, but only use maybe a fourth of the volume. And then that's all you'll need. And we'll get to the next steps later, but that is typically what I would recommend in regards to using a fleet enema from CVS or Walgreens.
That is tip number 1. Speaking of tips, is there any important safety tips when it comes to preparing for sexual intercourse?
So number one, safety-wise, is communication. I always say when people ask, what should I think of first or what should I prepare with first? Communicate with your partner. Let them know what your expectations are. Let them know how you've prepared. I know it sounds like a crazy thing to talk about and maybe it's not super romantic, but it is kind of important to discuss what you've done ahead of time or what you expect them to do ahead of time, what you're comfortable with. And this will just reduce the risk of any surprises along the way. And maybe you don't want to talk about it, and that's totally fine. But my recommendation is always going to be to heavily communicate, express any concerns you may have about, proceeding into intercourse.
How to talk about hygiene before sexual intercourse?
Right. So it isn't the most comfortable topic. Neither is intercourse, neither is douching, neither is being gay half the time. But the reality is, if your partner is not concerned whatsoever with your hygiene, and you are also not concerned, then that is particularly unique in your own journey. But if you are concerned about hygiene, you want to make sure your partner is on the same page with you. So bringing it up is not a bad idea. So being able to be mature enough to say, hey, this is what I did ahead of time, just so you know, or hey, I didn't do this, just so you know, or this is what my regimen is like. What is your regimen like? Can be just helpful to reduce any concerns that you may have in regards to hygiene. That being said, if that is not a concern for you, I'm not here to make you feel judged that you should have this conversation beforehand. I'm just giving you what I would do if hygiene was a concern for me. Everybody has their own context of what's best for them. If it's some sort of in the moment, passion session, the last thing you're going to do is pull out your clipboard and say, hey, let's check off the list. And that's totally fine. I don't expect you to, but it could be helpful if hygiene is a concern for you to bring it up. I have patients that say, hey, I want to check your STD record and your labs before sex. And that is their right. They should be able to bring that up to you. And if you're uncomfortable, walk away. or, don't proceed. But similarly, if hygiene is your issue, hygiene is your concern, bring it up. If they respond negatively to that, then that's probably a good sign that you shouldn't proceed. So everybody's different, and finding the partner that's best for you is going to start with communicating.
Communication is key, always.
Yeah, unless that's not your thing, then find a partner who's also not into communication. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Whatever works for you.
whatever works for you.
So, can you provide a step-by-step
Oh my.
instructions on how to douche properly?
Absolutely. So in general, it's going to start with finding a reliable device or douche that you're comfortable using. Of course, you want to find something an appropriate size. You want to fill that with lukewarm water. Of course, insert the device into the anal cavity gently. Make sure it's lubricated beforehand. Squeeze the water inside and allow the water to clean the inside of the rectum. Then you'll want to wait an appropriate amount of time. Then you release the water and allow your body to rest at least 30 minutes afterwards. So you don't want to jump right into intercourse after you've let that sort of happen. And for some people, it takes a few rounds. You want to let the water run clear, is what they say, the kids say these days. And then, of course, again, rest. You don't want to jump right into the activity. You need those muscles to relax and let them sort of reset before going to Pound Town.
That's good. You don't want to do it right before the
Right.
action.
Exactly.
You want to have some
Give
time
yourself
to
some time.
preparation.
Yeah.
Is there a best technique for cleaning the backside?
So my recommendation in regards to technique when using a douche is initially finding a device that is going to be perfect for you. I typically recommend finding a small bulb that has a small insertable piece. The reason is there are so many devices out there that are massive. They hold a lot of water, they go extremely deep, and that is not what you need. You need a small amount of water to move a small distance, 7 to 9 inches deep into the rectum. Propelling a small bulb like this moves water very fast. If you have a large bulb, you're going to have the risk of moving that water way too deep. And if you go beyond your rectum, you're never going to clean out your colon. Your colon is many, many feet long, and it's
Wow.
full of movement and material that you don't want to expel into your rectum, as then you're just kind of cleaning out stuff that wasn't even there in the first place. Disaster. And this happens a lot, and it's very frustrating, and it can take people hours and hours to go through. So first pick the right device, use lukewarm water. That's all you need. You want to make sure it's not too hot, not too cold, as that can irritate the lining. So a room temperature water is a great place to get started. Most importantly, too, you want to make sure you release the water gently. You don't want to over push the water in, as that's going to cause irritation and potentially make the water go too far. And then allow the water to gently expel out and give yourself some time to rest before repeating that process if necessary. Again, you want to let the water run clear so that you know you're clear to go, but don't rush it. If it's taking a long time and you've noticed that it's continuing to come out not clear, you may be overshooting. You may be pushing too much water in. So maybe take a break and try again with less water.
No pressure.
No
pun
pressure,
intended.
literally.
Do you recommend any type of device specifically? Is there a device that it's better to be used?
So I don't have a particular brand that I recommend. I just recommend you look at the size and look for something that is relatively small.
Size
Again,
matters.
Size matters in this situation. You want to avoid anything that looks large. You don't need a tip that's more than maybe a few inches long, maybe even less than that. So when you see these exaggerated, very long tips that are supposed to be inserted, that's a sign that that device is probably not going to be good for you. So again, look for something small, something that's easily fillable, and something that is not going to go too deep.
Why is that? Why is it so important not to use a long device that doesn't go too deep?
Right. So as we mentioned earlier, if the device goes too deep, if the device is too large, it's going to propel water too large and too deep, right? So it's going to give you too much volume, and it's going to go way beyond the rectum into the sigmoid colon, which would then push material from the colon into the rectum and making it feel as though the process is never going to end. Again, if it's taking you more than 30 minutes to let the water run clear, this is a sign that you're likely pushing water too deep or too far, and you need to take a rest and maybe reassess, regroup, reground, and start over. But give yourself some time to rest beforehand, because again, this can be an exhausting process.
So talking in practical terms, how long does this process takes, and how long would you say the person needs before going to anal intercourse?
Right. So the rectum is pretty small. It's not a very large organ. It's only about 7 to 9 inches inside. And so you want to think about how long would that realistically take to clean. So between 15 to 30 minutes maximum is how long it should take. So I usually say if it's taking more than about 20 minutes, you probably are shooting the water too deep, or maybe there's something irritating your stomach and it might be not be a good idea to proceed. But it usually should only take a few sessions of pushing the water in, letting it run clear in whatever environment that you're in, to be sufficient to clean out the rectum.
Is there any particular position that is better to do the cleaning process of the anal cavity?
Yeah, so that's another really good question. You've probably seen all different types of diagrams if you've ever Googled this and different recommendations. And it is really about your preference, whatever you prefer. Some people like to be sort of on the ground. I've seen some really bizarre positions. Ideally, in my opinion, you should just be in the shower standing. Standing is going to help gravity pull that water down and pull any debris with it. Also, it's going to be very easy to remove the contents when you're in the shower. It just washes down the drain and you don't have to cause any force. And so I typically recommend standing in the shower is the best way. You don't need to make any movements or bends or crazy sort of jumping up and down. That is not necessary. If anything, that's going to move again water too far into the colon upwards or backwards, however you want to look at it. But just standing in the shower, maybe slightly bent, is all that I would recommend.
So, other than using a douche, are there any alternatives to cleaning the anal cavity?
Absolutely. So you can consider just cleaning externally with a wipe, which I personally don't recommend only because those wipes can often be irritating. So I usually say if you're just trying to keep it as natural as possible, shower with some fragrance-free soap, trying to gently rub the area around the anus, and you can even use some fingers to move some of that into the anal cavity, and then focus on your diet. So high fiber foods, fiber supplementation is going to help to have healthy normal bowel movements. Those normal bowel movements with high fiber, you can think of fibers like a rake that sort of drags along the
Mm,
colon and along the rectum to remove any debris. And drinking lots and lots of water. Believe it or not, hydration is the most beneficial way to have consistent,
wow.
solid bowel movements.
What foods are high in fiber that you can eat throughout your day and have a healthy colon?
Right. So fruits, vegetables are going to both be high in fiber, especially like the peels of an apple. Broccoli is high in fiber, cauliflower, beans, nuts, legumes are going to be high in fiber as well. You want to avoid things like dairy products, soft foods, bread. Some grains can have a lot of fiber, like the Dave's bread that we love is full
Mm,
of nuts. So there's a lot of fiber there. And you can just look on the package. You can also, it'll tell you on the package what the amount of daily fiber is recommended in each serving of what you're eating. But in general, those whole foods are going to have the most fiber and be the most beneficial for your diet to produce a healthy colon.
what would you say is the best way to keep your colon healthy on a daily basis?
Yeah, again, fiber, fiber, fiber. You can't overdo it.
Fiber and water, fiber and water.
Yeah, so the best way to keep your colon healthy regularly is ensuring you get enough fiber and enough water. But something to be conscious of is if you are new to fiber, if you don't typically have a lot of fiber in your
Ah,
diet, take it slow. Your body is not going to adjust to a heavy amount of fiber very well in a short period of time. Even if you buy fiber supplements, they often tell you that. They'll say, in the beginning, take 1 capsule a day, then a week later, take 2, then a week later, take 3, maximum
right.
4. That's because if you take too much at one time and your body is not used to fiber, it can cause diarrhea or an upset stomach. So ease into it. This is not an overnight fix, but definitely lots of hydration is something you can fix right away. So if you're not doing that, that's the first thing you can start today. Start adding in fiber heavy foods and then consider a fiber supplement.
So, what about people who prefer not to use a douche or a device before anal sex? What should we tell them?
Yeah, so no shame to them at all. Really, comfort is key, number one, in regards to any capacity of sexual health. So if you're uncomfortable using a douche or device, there is no one who should be, pressuring you to do so. It's not necessary for everyone. If you are concerned that you are not getting to that level of hygiene that you're looking for, talk to a medical provider, talk to someone who you trust, or just consider taking a look at your general diet. Are you drinking enough water? Again, something super easy to fix. Are you having enough fiber in your diet? Not the easiest thing to fix, but something that you can work towards. And then are you doing everything in your capacity to keep yourself avoidant of things that might cause your stomach to feel upset? Of course, dairy products are a huge one. Processed food, fatty foods. Fatty foods are probably the number one reason why our diet can contribute to poor colon health. So removing some of that can be helpful too. And then just stick to things that you are comfortable with. Showering is a great way to stay hygienic and to be ready to go for a lot of people. So again, no shame to anyone who is not interested in using a device. That is probably the majority of the population.
And how should we approach our partners when it comes to douching or preparing for anal intercourse?
Right. So communication again is key. Finding out what your partner is comfortable with, finding out what you're comfortable with. If you expect your partner to douche and you're not doing the same thing, that's not fair. If you want to approach your partner about being more comfortable doing something that they're not familiar with, maybe express your experience with it. Let them know how it helped you or how you got to that level. But yeah, it all starts with communication, and maybe sharing your own experience can help them to understand where you're coming from and how maybe they can start to adjust their behaviors to be similar to yours.
Yeah, everyone is different. We all have different bodies and different perspectives. Some may love douching, others may feel uncomfortable, and
Yeah.
whatever works for you, for your body, and as long as you're not doing excessively.
It sounds like I've taught you some things here today.
See, I've learned a lot about douching. I guess I can start practicing.
You are a douche professional. Professional douchebag. Oh,
That's funny. Okay, so
I'm
I
so
guess
glad I get to have these conversations with you. It definitely makes it fun.
he's a sweetie. He's a sweetie, right?
And
Lovely.
lovely.
She's so quiet.
She's quiet. She's shy.
It's her show, and we're just guests here.
I'll
And
live.
she's in the middle. So I guess that answers a lot of questions. Okay, speaking of questions, we have some questions for the audience.
Oh my
Okay.
goodness. Here we go.
So how can individuals ensure a safe and comfortable experience considering intercourse?
Right. So, like we've talked about, first things first, communication. Talk about your expectations, talk about your concerns, talk about what you're comfortable with, talk about your boundaries. So, that's number one. Number two, consider a hygienic approach. Of course, as we've just been talking about, are you prepared mentally? Are you prepared physically? And then the number one thing to consider is lubricant, because again, what we've talked about, the most important thing is relaxation and ensuring that there's a pleasurable experience, and that's going to be key. So lots and lots of lubricant to ensure the anatomy is open and ready for business.
So what are common misconceptions when it comes to douching, and how can we debunk them?
So there are many misconceptions in regards to douching and anal sex, and the most common one would be that douching is unsafe or unhealthy, and that's completely false. Douching can be extremely beneficial, not only physically to reduce the risk of infection and ensure that there is a hygienic approach to sex, but also that you're going to have peace of mind and comfort moving forward with it. The most important thing to consider is, are you doing it correctly? Are you using the right device, the right solution, and you're not overdoing it? So certainly there are some limitations and some things to be considered about, but it is completely safe. And if anything, a great way to feel comfortable and hygienic throughout the process.
Are there any alternative methods that can also promote cleanliness in the anal cavity and that can help us with anal intercourse?
Right. So alternatively to using a douche, you want to make sure you're getting plenty of hydration, drinking lots and lots of water. You want to make sure you're getting adequate fiber in your diet and that you're used to that fiber. You don't want to start out of nowhere going from zero to plenty of fiber, because that can irritate the colon as well. But certainly Americans don't get enough fiber in their diet, so small adjustments there can make a huge impact. And yeah, just in general, health wise, hygiene, just make sure you are practicing normal hygiene habits. Showering beforehand can be super beneficial and be plenty. So you wouldn't have to use a douche unless you'd like to go to that extra step or make sure that things are ready to go.
Smooth sailing.
Smooth sailing.
Why is lubricant so important?
Right. So lubricant is going to ensure that there is reduced friction at the opening of the anal cavity. Of course, we know that the skin around the anus is extremely sensitive. It doesn't produce lubricant naturally, and so it's going to be highly liable to tear or to rupture or to become irritated. And so anytime that you're penetrating anything into the anal cavity, you need to use lubricant. That includes using a douche or, of course, anal sex. The more lubricant, the better. Of course, it's going to further reduce the risk of friction or damage to that tissue. So in regards to anything going inside, you need to use lubricant.
Let's talk about some misconceptions because obviously this is a topic that has a lot of myths and misconceptions.
Mhm.
So, first and foremost, it's true that douching is absolutely necessary for cleaning the anal cavity.
Right. As we discussed throughout the video, it is not absolute. It can be certainly helpful, and especially for those out there who are wanting the most hygienic approach possible and to be completely clear of mind that things could go south. Douching can be a great step to take, but it's not absolutely necessary. Other things you can do, as we've mentioned, is proper hydration, drinking lots of water, make sure your fiber intake is adequate, make sure you just practice normal hygiene routine to keep the area clean in the perineum and around the anal cavity and the anal exterior. But yeah, douching is not absolutely necessary, and it's all about your comfort when thinking of anal sex. You need to make sure you're comfortable with the whole process and not doing anything that would go out of your comfort zone.
Is it true that douching eliminates the chance of surprises?
Right. So it certainly would reduce the risk of a surprise that may occur along the way, especially when you are douching properly to remove any excess debris. But there's always the potential that debris can still be there, or maybe in the process of moving during anal intercourse, you have to be aware, as well as let your partner know if they're not aware, that there's no absolute way to ensure hygiene, whether that is anal intercourse or vaginal intercourse. There can always be things that come along and surprise us. And if you are with a mature person, they probably already know this. If not, you can explain it to them and educate them that, hey, this is a part of it. We're humans, biology is happening all around us, and there's no way to 100% prevent any surprises from occurring.
Is it true that douching is harmless?
Another false statement. So, douching can certainly be harmless, especially if overdone. As we talked about, there are some biological changes that can happen if douching occurs too frequently. We have also seen there can be damage to the good bacteria in our bodies if you douche excessively. And also, you want to make sure you're following a proper technique of not using too much water, which could then go farther than the rectum and make the process very prolonged and ultimately maybe even prevent you from having anal intercourse. So certainly there is some harm attached to anything, and douching does come with its risks, but it also comes with many benefits as well.
Is it true that douching is required before every instance of intercourse?
Again, yeah, that is not true. You don't want to overdo it, and it certainly can be helpful to use on a as needed basis, but it is not required. In fact, if you are following even a moderately healthy diet and drinking plenty of water, this is the best way to keep your colon healthy and ready to go, but certainly not something you want to do every time that you are preparing for intercourse.
Is it true that douching prevents the transmission of STDs?
That is false. Unfortunately, it can reduce the risk of infection that would be caused by debris left over in the rectum, but these are typically not related to STDs. And so, douching is not going to reduce the risk of developing an STD. If you're concerned that you're at risk with your partner, certainly consider using condoms and lots of lubricant, as that's going to reduce the risk of tears in the rectum as well as the anal cavity, and of course, offer a barrier protection.
Is it true that douching with cleaning solutions is safe?
It is not safe in the method of douching. It's going to actually cause a lot of irritation if you use any sort of solution that contains soap or detergent. Saline solution even can cause some irritation. Certainly, any solution you get that's inside of an enema is meant to cause irritation in the colon to make you pass a bowel movement. So, my ultimate recommendation is to use lukewarm water. That's all you need. Try to avoid any other soap detergent like solution, as it's going to cause a big mess.
Speaking of mess, is it true that douching always prevents mess?
I wish it was that simple, but again, there are always surprises that can happen. We're all human and things happen from time to time. So you need to be with a partner who's mature enough to understand if they're going to proceed with anal intercourse. There are surprises that can happen along the way. While douching can reduce that risk, it does not prevent all forms of messes or surprises.
Is it true that douching immediately before anal sex is sufficient?
Using a douche immediately before anal intercourse is going to increase the risk for more surprises. The main reason is you want to let those muscles in that rectum area relax after douching at least 30 minutes, maybe even a little bit longer, to ensure that if there is a bowel movement coming, that you're able to catch it before going into intercourse. So, of course, stimulating that area with water is a great way to see what needs to settle. So, giving yourself about half an hour before moving into intercourse is going to be a great idea to reduce the risk further that there could be a mess or some sort of surprise. So don't douche right before intercourse. You need some time to rest.
Is it true that douching is equally safe for everyone?
This is a really important question because not everyone has the same health in their colon. Some people have inflammatory bowel disease. Some people have diseases of their colon that haven't even been diagnosed yet, and multiple other issues that can be present there. So I don't recommend douching for everyone, especially if you already have an upset stomach or some sort of abdominal discomfort before, during, or after sex. Certainly talk to your doctor to make sure your colon is healthy enough before proceeding with douching. But in general, if you have a healthy colon and you've never had issues there, douching should not cause you any problems.
So today we learn about the safe methods to do douching, how to do it, the best time to do it, and all of the important tips and suggestions.
Yeah.
Take enough water, fiber. So after doing all of that, hours in advance, prepared, it's time for anal intercourse. And then we have a surprise. What do we do?
We talk about it. We act like adults and we say, oh my goodness. Or we wait till it's over if it's a small surprise and then act like nothing major has happened because this is normal. You have to expect there's going to be an occasional surprise. Just try not to make that person who was responsible feel poor about the issue or if they did something wrong. If you notice the other person who may be feeling responsible for the issue is trying to avoid the topic, kindly understand that they don't want to talk about it. So read the cues, read the room. But if that person who may feel responsible is wanting to talk about it and make sure you're okay, approach them with kindness. This is sex. It's meant to be something that brings people together, not separates us. After sex, we can have all sorts of emotions that run through our heads. Some of us want to just get out of there. Some of us want to cuddle. Some of us are in between. Have respect for one another. Don't make anyone feel shame or feel bad that surprises happen. It's bound to happen. We're human. Mistakes, surprises are a part of our biology and what makes us human.
Beautiful words. Claps to
I'm a
you.
poet.
And a doctor. Well, thank you. This
Well,
was very insightful.
thank you. You've come such a long journey to have this talk with me. And so I just really appreciate that from
Thank
the
you for
other room.
listening all the way because now I feel like you are also a master in the art of douching.
Professional. And thank you for joining us on another episode. We've had a blast talking about something that probably made me blush throughout. You'll get to judge my redness throughout this video. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. I hope we can convince you to follow up with us for the next video on something else we'll be talking about. I'm sure health and sex related. If you have any questions about the topics we talked about, please leave them in the comments below. Tips, things that you've heard along the way, or things that you want us to talk about in a future video. I think we're supposed to ask you to like, subscribe, send positive vibes, screenshot, zip code, area code, all of that. So please do all of those things so we can become a thriving
Family.
yeah, YouTube family.
Well, we have Mother, Lovely, and
Hopefully you're enjoying Lava Lee as much as we are. But we'll see you next time. Have a great rest of whatever day this is of the week that you're watching this on YouTube.
thank you for listening. Bye. What about the never endings? Is that a term, anatomical term?
The nerve endings?
Never endings.